Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unpacking MSIX, a panel discussion. My name is Kendra Morton. I'm the Principal Product Marketing Manager at Revenera, and it's my honor to moderate today's discussion with three extremely knowledgeable and talented professionals. But before I introduce our guests, a few quick notes. If you would like to submit a question, over on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a Q&A tab. Please type in your question there. And you can do that at any time throughout the event. You don't have to wait until the end. We're going to take questions throughout. So we'll also pause at the end once we've gotten through all of our topics to give you another shot at asking a question of our panelists before we close things out for the day. Hopefully not the case, but things do happen, right? So if you're having any technical difficulty, head on over to the chat and you can message my friend and colleague, Jacob Ward. So you click on chat, then click on private, locate Jacob, and go ahead and reach out to him. He's the mastermind behind the scenes, and he'll get it all sorted out for you. And finally, we have a bunch of resources under the resources tab referring to the who, what, and how of MSIX. Be sure to head over there before signing out today, and you can have your pick of reading material to kind of broaden today's discussion. Okay, and with that, let's get our panelists introduced. Gentlemen, perhaps I call your name. If you don't mind, go ahead and give a quick 30-second intro of yourselves to our audience. So our first speaker is Venkat Ramdanga. He's Senior Product Marketing, or I'm sorry, that's me, Senior Product Manager at Revenera. Bit of a tongue twister. Venkat and I have done a number of podcasts and webinars and tech talks together. And Venkat, it's always good to spend time with you. So welcome and tell our audience a little about yourself.
Thanks for having me here today, Kendra. And I'm Venkat, and I've been associated with Install Shield and Revenera for over 15 years maybe now. And I've been working, since the days of EXEs, MIS, MSI, evolution to Apex and MSIX, and I've been closely working with our colleagues here, from the Admin Studio team, and also with Microsoft closely, tracking the developments of MSIX for a while now. So happy to be here and talk about where we are and take any questions on the way.
Very good, thank you, Venkat. Our next speaker is Bob Kelly. Bob is the Director of Product Management at Flexera and is quite known for his expertise in all things MSIX. And we're happy to have you today, Bob.
Thanks. Great to be here. I see I've been in the endpoint management space for over 20 years now. I founded appdeploy.com, which is now IT Ninja, which is a place where a lot of IT pros go to discuss this type of thing. I've authored many papers, some books. I've enjoyed speaking at related events, and I was a Microsoft MVP for a while, and spent many years working in desktop management before shifting to product management. With a focus on the types of products that I once leveraged as an IT pro. So it's cool to be here to talk about this, which is the most interesting thing to happen in the space in quite some time.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Good to have you. And last, but certainly not least, our final roundtable speaker is Kieran Montague. Kieran is the Senior Product Manager also at Flexera. Kieran has over 15 years of experience in the software industry and recently helped create an ebook, or book, if you will, on a developer's guide to MSIX. Kieran, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Kendra. I'm super excited, especially because it's about MSIX. That is the thing I've been closely following ever since it was launched in 2018. And I also authored a book along with some of my colleagues on the Revenera side and Tim Mangan, who is an expert in the space. For somebody who's interested to have a look at the book, they could reach out to the handout space. I have about over a decade of experience in the application packaging space, and I've been involved with products like Admin Studio and a little bit of Install Shield. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to see how this discussion goes. Thanks.
Yeah, so very good. So welcome to you all. All right, so why are we here? We have to go back to 2018 when Microsoft announced a new packaging format called MSIX with security, ease of use, and reliability as key benefits of MSIX. It continues to gain adoption. MSIX enables developers to provide a native auto update experience without integrating third-party updater tools. Enterprises can stay current and ensure that their applications are always up to date, while at the same time targeting a large user base. So today, we want to answer questions like, what has adoption of MSIX been like for both enterprise organizations and ISVs? What are some of the use cases and success stories? What impact has MSIX had over the last several years as organizations have ramped up both acceptance and implementation? So Microsoft created MSIX for several reasons. One being they wanted to enhance the ability to deliver a reliable installation experience. The creation of MSIX was based on 3 core principles: the promise of being simple, being safe, and reliable. So what is some additional background and context on MSIX? And Venkat, I think we'll start with you.
Absolutely. So I can't really believe it's already 4 years, maybe exactly 4 years, because 2018 Microsoft Build Conference is when MSIX was first introduced or announced, right? And all of us were excited for it because it brought in new opportunities, and tons of advantages over traditional installation technologies, right? So I just want to give a recap of the need, how the need for MSIX was originally begun. So though I'm not part of the team, I can only anticipate that how traditional setups were just completely abused, and how they've led into a state of Windows operating system being completely unusable, or what is called or termed as grid rot over a period of time, right? So the core of MSIX, which I personally like, the reason why I think MSIX was born is to make software installs and uninstalls far more reliable, than compared to what they were with traditional MSI or an EXE based installation, right? So there's several advantages of using MSIX. They're pretty predictable. You will know why the software is not installed, or why the software is not working, and it is pretty safe because MSIX mandates you to digitally sign your application, right? It doesn't really mean that there is cannot be any malware installed in it, but that you're actually installing an app from a known software vendor rather installing a random package out from the internet, right? And one of the biggest things that we have seen in our experience also according to official Microsoft stats as well, in whatever tests we have seen, the uninstalls are really, really clean. So I think Microsoft claims 99%, 99.6% of uninstalls are really clean. So this part is really important because the more apps you keep installing on your Windows operating system, and the more residue they actually leave, makes the entire operating system rot over a period of time, right? So MSIX solves this problem, and this is one really good advantage that our customers actually see, because as a software vendor, you want to be in far less support calls when you're trying to upgrade your software. And every time the previous version leaves a residue on the machine, it becomes a very sticky point for ISVs to go ahead support the existing installation, because this is not their core business. The core business is ensure that their actual app, LOB app, actually works fine for their customers, right? So this is one big thing that we have seen as biggest advantage of that we actually hear from our customers, right? Of course, there are several other advantages for enterprises like displays optimization, network optimization, which maybe software vendors might not appreciate a lot, but if you look at the scale at which apps are required in an enterprise, this makes a lot of sense, right? And the technology itself is evolving. At a very good pace, I would say. Back in the day, I think in 2018, it was a very basic technology, but then now it has evolved into even some of the UI customization as well, right? So Microsoft has been appreciative of the feedback, and we have been working on ensuring that all of that feedback is incorporated in all the toolings that is available, and also that customers actually can take advantage of this, right? And sometimes technology takes some time for adoption. We'll talk further more about it, but as any other technology, adoption is definitely slow. It's not as fast as when somebody is grabbing an iPhone and moving on to the next thing, right? So it's definitely slow because there's too many roadblocks along the way in adopting to a new installation technology, especially from an ISV point of view. Right, and I would say that now our users are still continuing to evaluate what's the biggest thing, what's in it for me, if I really have to move over to MSIX.
Bob, Kieran, anything to add?
What the attention that I got when the announcement about MSIX was made back in 2018 was when Microsoft said, "You will never regret uninstalling the software." And I, being in the space of application packaging, where we speak to a lot of package engineers, deployment engineers, we understand how big of a problem is that for our deployment engineers to have a clean uninstallation. Right, so I think that has come out really well, and of course the whole containerization and the technology that they have brought in with this new package format and the modernization that they have brought in, and a lot of simplicity, security. There are various other aspects around MSIX that makes this a good potential and a future format, which maybe someday might replace MSI, which I'm not very confident about, but we'll see, and we'll see how that goes. But of course, the uninstallation is really going to be a big boon for the package engineers, other than all the other benefits.
It's funny that uninstall is a big deal, and the kind of the promise of a clean uninstall with MSIX is dependent on that setup coming from the vendor, right? Because as an IT pro, we have to take vendor setups that don't come in MSIX format or that don't install silently or can't be easily customized. We have to repackage those into a format. Everybody used to repackage everything to MSI because that was, a great standardized format that had wide adoption from ISVs, largely because it was enforced as a Windows logo requirement. So everybody kind of had to get on board, and it took off really well. But it had a lot of benefits over, just whatever setup. It didn't necessarily have command line support or logging or rollback or any of the features that we kind of take for granted. But if we're getting a setup as an IT pro and repackaging it into MSIX, there's a whole new set of complications with that, because older applications don't necessarily play well with MSIX. And so we have to inject fix-ups, which is complicated. And then there's support for older technology like services or context menus. And MSIX is introducing support for these things because the enterprises are saying we need this support in order to support old applications. But they break that uninstall cleanliness, right? Because now when you are putting context menu things in or services things into the package, they're outside the virtual container and actually being installed on the endpoint. So they can be handled during an uninstall, but it's not that guaranteed everything's in the package, so it was never really there kind of scenario that MSIX is kind of associated with. So the hope is that ISVs see the benefits of MSIX, jump on board, and we start seeing that delivered directly. So Firefox was the first major enterprise application to do so, and there's been a bunch of smaller Microsoft applications, but getting those in is having enterprises that haven't, had their toe in the water figuring out, what is MSIX? Is it going to work for me? What are the benefits playing with it? It's now, coming to them as something that they have to get their hands on and play with in order to support these applications. And I think people will prefer it. There's a lot of benefits when it works right. And they'll always work right if they came from the vendor as an application designed to play in a virtual container like this.
One question quickly, Bob or Kiran. So, you mentioned a very good example of Firefox, right? So, do either of you have any idea of how Firefox is actually handling the plugin scenario? Because Firefox itself has tons of extensions which play, right? So, is it still closed territory, or Firefox fully supports the entire ecosystem?
I haven't personally looked into the way Firefox has packaged all those plugins into the MSIX, but yeah, that is maybe one thing that I really want to look and curious about.
I imagine it goes back to the fact that Mozilla created the MSIX package, so it knows where to look outside the package for the plugins. They don't have to be inside. So I think a lot of the complications with making MSIX work come when repackaging and the application doesn't behave the way it necessarily should. So we have to work around those problems with the package support framework.
One point from the IT pro point of view is these guys were never used to signing a package before the deployment. And I see that as a little overhead. While we understand the security aspect of it and how it keeps the package integrated and you know that it's coming from the right source, but that I think is going to be a little overhead for our guys, and I'm sure over the time they will get used to the whole concept of signing the packages and getting to deal with the certificates and the challenges that, hey, the certificate name should always match with the publisher name and all of those things, right? I think over the time they will, and also there are multiple ways of signing MSIX package. You could, as simple as you could use a certificate file, or you could get a certificate from the store, and even newly introduced the Azure Vault and a lot of other things. So that I think could be a little overhead, but again, there are tools, like Admin Studio, Install Shield, which could make their job really easy to deal and manage with those packages.
Yeah, I actually expect most enterprises will re-sign, right? So you have a signed package, it came from the right source, but then you're probably going to sign it with the certificate that you manage for your enterprise, because you don't necessarily want to trust every individual vendor certificate that you support in your environment.
If it is coming from a vendor like Firefox or many other such vendors, where you know that you have got the certificates supplied by a trusted CA, that those might be inbuilt in the Windows already. So maybe the chances of you deploying them separately are very less. Unless you repackage them, then I see there will be a need that you want to sign using your own certificate.
So I'd like to take this topic, to our audience as well, whoever has joined today. Thank you firstly. And we keep, hearing this a lot from, every time we talk about, signing being a big, pain point, right? So I'd like to, understand from our audience today if, how many of you actually feel that the mandate to, digitally sign an MSIX package is a sticky point for you to adopt MSIX. Feel free to share your thoughts in Q&A or in the chat section.
Very good. Very good. So all of these things then have led to a growing interest in MSIX for those looking for a clean install and uninstall process, for example, or supporting the ability to deploy applications via enterprise tools like Microsoft Endpoint Manager or even to the cloud. It helps to solve many of the challenges that IT pros like yourselves have faced over the years when it comes to deploying applications for enterprises. And that kind of leads us to our next subject, enterprises. Bob, I'll throw this question to you. How has the technology evolved from an enterprise use case point of view? And given your experience, your take on MSIX?
Well, I think it's pretty great for all the reasons that we've been talking about. There's a lot of potential there, but adoption has been slow. But I think it's been slow because it wasn't launched as like a ready-to-go technology. They knew that there'd be iterative improvements required and that it would take time for everybody to wrap their heads around the benefits and start to take it on. So now that we're starting to see it used more, I think the benefits are more clear to more people that get their hands on it. Enforcing standards is another kind of key thing. So you have to sign it. That's a good thing. Another thing is there's no custom actions in MSIX. You can't cheat and call it an MSIX when it's not an MSIX. Vendors would sometimes wrap a legacy command line setup as a custom action and call it MSI. But there's nothing in the file table, nothing in the registry table, and you can't effectively enjoy any of the benefits of MSI. It was just checking that box. But MSIX isn't going to make that same mistake. There's no custom action capability. But at the same time, enterprises are given some flexibility. So we can use a PSF fix-up to inject a PowerShell script that will run before or after execution of the application. But that's something that enterprises can do, but ISVs can't. So ISVs can't ship an MSIX that just runs PowerShell scripts and does whatever the heck it wants. So I think there's some benefit there in that things will work the way you expect them to work. There shouldn't be a lot of surprises. Another thing really driving enterprise interest and adoption is app attach. So the virtual PC world is becoming more and more common, and there's support to basically sideload these MSIX packages right into a virtual image, so that it doesn't have to install the file, registry entries, et cetera, just appear and can be updated on the outside and so forth. So that support's being integrated into the Azure management UI. So I think that's yet another reason that people might consider MSIX that maybe haven't, if they have a big investment in virtual PC, particularly, in that there's non-persistent, instances, and you don't want to have to run an advertised install or stream even bits of an application on launch time. You just want it there, but not necessarily the same for everybody. So there's a lot of nice benefits there that I think are driving interest from an enterprise standpoint. Like I said, we would repackage to MSI because that was the format that the vendors were largely leaning towards. So we got some standardization, but MSIX, it should be the same thing. If you're repackaging today, you might still pick MSI just because of familiarity. But as we start to see more MSIX and enjoy the benefits of management and everything else, I think that that will become a likely target for people. We're seeing some enterprise customers do some applications, not all. We're seeing some managed service providers, taking on MSIX. I haven't seen anybody go all in, but there are more and more people, every month telling us that they're taking it very seriously and, talking to us about our functionality and where it is to help them get there easier.
Kieran, any other use cases?
Yeah, the evolution has been good, but my personal viewpoint is it's slow. It's been 4 years, but if you look at the time when it was announced, there were quite a lot of limitations where the adoption couldn't have been quick enough, right? Like what Bob mentioned, when the announcement was made, there was no support for services. And we know that many applications today need services and many other such limitations, like with respect to custom actions. There are really a large number of packages who have custom actions in them. From an ISV point of view, you would know that already, that many of the packages have got custom actions because you want to do something and take some decisions while the package is getting installed. So all of that is not supported today, but there have been alternatives like what Bob mentioned. There is a partial fix-up, not ideal, but that is a very good alternative for you to take care of certain things. Now, if I talk about the adoption point of view, and on the evolution, I think they're also trying to work on some side projects like, I think it's called Windows SDK, where they're trying to improve the UWP API coverages. So when you take a legacy package or legacy application and repackage it to MSIX, the chances of it running into runtime errors because it couldn't find a Windows API or a legacy old Windows API are less. So overall, technology has been evolving, but I think it needs to improve. And from the adoption point of view, based on various conversations we have, Bob and I have a lot of conversations with our customers, and of course, the number one topic is MSIX. I can definitely see the way how the conversations have changed in the last 4 years. When we got into the conversations like 4 years or 3 years ago, it was mostly about the curiosity. Hey, do you support this? Because they don't know the package yet. So and slowly we got into discussion as to, I have a bunch of MSIs or EXEs. I want to know if those are good candidates for conversion. And then the conversations got into, can you help us convert? And today we are at a point where they have converted. They are seeing some runtime issues and they want help from us to fix those using the partial fix-ups or any package support frame fix-ups. So that gives me a feeling that that option is improving. That option is getting to a point where maybe we are expecting. It is going to be slow, considering the limitations, but it's definitely better than what it was maybe a couple of years ago.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention AppV as part of this conversation. So AppV was an application virtualization technology that was for enterprises only, and it came out a long time ago, got some good momentum about 10 years ago, and it was pretty exciting. But it wasn't free. It required a special license. It saw moderate adoption, not widespread. But I recall wishing that ISVs would be encouraged to provide AppV packages directly, because that would really change everything. And that's basically what's happening with MSIX. And the problems that we, as IT pros trying to repackage to MSIX encounter, again, won't be issues for an ISV that knows their application and how it works. You wouldn't do the things that an older application would do. Services is a good example, right? Like there's a lot of different ways to go about the things that you might have used a service for in the past. But older applications use them frequently. There was no restriction. You could be creative and use it however you wanted, but now maybe it's discouraged. And similarly with drivers. So one thing that people that would argue MSIX isn't ready yet would point out is, what doesn't support drivers? It's not going to support drivers. And I think this is a good stance for Microsoft to take, is that drivers should be handled separately as updates, but it kind of requires them to be separated from the applications they're dependent on. So enterprise customers all the time receive an installation that contains the driver and the software around that driver together as one package. And that can't be repackaged into MSIX. The application part could, but not the driver. So just getting vendors that provide drivers to separate the application and the driver would be, really the solution that I think Microsoft is going for. They're pushing that, and drivers is one of those things I don't see them adding. And if they did, it'd be like services or context menu support, where it's actually happening outside the MSIX anyway, and kind of breaking some of the benefits around it.
Yeah, I agree with that point, Bob. I never understood this point of drivers. I understand this how traditionally drivers are installed, but I always felt that drivers have the place in the core system image rather than trying to part of a separate installer and the need to install it separately, right? And
they're just tied to the app and really shouldn't be.
Yeah. And the more the Windows APIs are also evolving to bridge this gap between software and the underlying interfaces to access the hardware, right? So I think that's only helping the cause in Microsoft stance to say the driver's real place is actually either system updates or a part of the system image itself. I think it takes a while for people to get that and move away. That okay, so this is how it's going to be. So for me, there is no real need of MSIX or value in MSIX. So it will take a while for that education.
I want to acknowledge there's a comment that was sent over, so I do want to acknowledge this comment, and I'm just going to read it off. So the issue of certificate per MSIX also appears must be time-stamped every time. No custom actions, no context menus, ends up that every MSIX-based deployment package has to be wrapped or scripted with PowerShell. It's very time-consuming. I just want to acknowledge that comment. Any more commentary on that?
I think I agree to what Jack said in that comment.
Yeah.
It is because of all the reasons that we have been discussing, and like we discussed also about the timestamping part, the signing part. So that's right. You may have to do some work outside of that MSIX maybe to achieve the kind of deployment that you wanted for a package. If it was, if you wanted a behavior like your legacy package, if it was MSI or EXE. I agree to what he says.
Yeah, but the context menus are supported now, so those don't have to be scripted outside. But the signing and the timestamping, the tools you use should help make that easier. That's obviously what we're trying to do with that in Studio.
And timestamping, I think, is really critical to ensure that even though the certificate expires, I think your app continues to run beyond the certificate expiration time. So I can only think that that could be a reason why timestamping is probably mandatory. But I mean, it's a part of the signing process. I totally get it. I think that's why I'm not commenting on whether how digital signing is a big sticky point, because though we get these questions, ISVs do it all the time, because they really don't ship bulk of them or the majority of them don't ship their apps without signing their installers or the apps themselves, right? Because otherwise Microsoft flags this, Windows operating system flags this, saying it's an untrusted app, right? So yeah, I would see that this challenge is primarily on the enterprise side, because I recently attended one more meeting where they say the entire signing process is freaking expensive, right? So I do not want to spend a lot of my money and resources into taking something from an external vendor, okay, and so when I repackage it, anyways, I'm tampering it always, so signing is lost from the original vendor. So the fact that I have to now digitally sign it just adds to my cost. So I don't know how much of an impediment this is to for the adoption itself, but they definitely see this as a sticky point to just add out the cost involved. Thanks, Jack, for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. Always good to keep the conversation going that way. So all of this.
There's one more comment from Arun as well. I want to acknowledge that as well, and it's indicated the same thing. I think Arun, is indicating a question or a point from the ISV side as well, as where signing could be a sticky point, right? Because generally the signing actually happens towards the end of my release, and not I mean, if you got a local certificate, then it's all well and good. But then if you're using a HSM or some kind of a shared certificate across the organization, right? So the signing process actually happens only during the end of the release. So all through all the intermediate test cycles, they cannot simply be tested without an unsigned app in it, right? So I think it's a good point, Arun. Thank you for sharing that feedback as well.
Absolutely.
I think another interesting thing that comes with MSIX is this update capability. So as an ISV, you might spend a lot of time, investing in an ability to automatically update the application. And the first thing every enterprise does when they receive the application is find out how to turn that off and make that part of the custom deployment so that it will not update itself. That could be one, because it requires permissions that the user doesn't have, so it would fail, or it could just be version control. The enterprise wants to make sure that they know what versions are out there and that they're supporting. But that's a default thing for everyone to do when they get an application is, does it have automatic updates? How do I turn it off? That being built into the installer in a controlled way gives enterprises control over the updates. And so it'll both save you from building something custom and give the enterprises the control they need, so they don't have to reverse engineer and repackage the setup to make it work the way they want. Those customizations should be a lot less necessary.
And then on the ISV side, they're taking a similar data point, right, Bob? So when we talk to our customers and say, hey, about this auto update capability and all of these capabilities of updating the app itself when you launch it, and time and schedule it, and all of that. Like I have invested tons of money in building my own technology for updating my app. So either I have written a homegrown utility, or I've integrated a third-party SDK into my application to ensure that they actually receive updates, in app, right? So yeah, it's a good thing, but we probably don't need it, right? So that's one thing, but that's one thing we keep hearing from our users. But those who haven't, have do not have anything set in their app, I find the auto update capabilities from MSIX really cool. I understand your use case from the enterprise to first turn it off, but ISVs do really care that patches go the moment they receive, right? So if somebody doesn't have an integration with any other SDK or their own technology, they find it really useful.
Yeah, and security updates are so frequent, common, and important to every enterprise now that it's an impossible battle, right? You've got hundreds of applications in your portfolio, and there's a handful of new updates. If not every day, a good dozen or two a week, and just to get the new updates, be aware of them, test them, roll them out to everybody is a huge undertaking. And it's really the primary thing these days. It used to be there'd be a lot of repackaging and application deployment activity around move to a new version of Windows. But these days it's really about the applications that are out there, keeping them up to date with the latest secure version. So any technology that can help make that easier is going to be very welcome.
I'm curious to really see how the whole auto update works out for our IT pros. While they generally, like you said, they turn off the auto update so they get better control as to what version they want to deploy. But with this auto update feature in MSIX, and which is a lot simpler, it might also come as a time saving for our IT pros. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm guessing they might change the download URL from the vendors to a download URL that they maintain internally, and still continue having the auto update turned on and plays the new version only when they want to, after they have tested everything. So the auto update can still go on for MSIX. So I'm really curious to see how that goes, because I haven't seen anybody reach to a point, or I haven't had any conversation with anybody where they said, hey, we either turn off completely, or we are trying to use that auto update functionality this way, so we don't have to worry about deploying the auto updates ourselves, but let MSIX take care of itself. So I'm curious. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, the real benefit will be getting those up-to-date latest versions direct from the vendors' binaries, and that, it's not really a reality today. So it's really more theoretical in how we do it. Like you say, a staging area so you can control it, or there, you can set policies to control what version or how often. So there's the controls available, but how it will be adopted and how it will be implemented, is still yet to come. There's options.
Okay, I'm going to step in. Want to be cognizant of our time, make sure we get to the rest of our kind of questions here, but great discussion. So that gives us all some perspective from the point of view of enterprise organizations, right? That's kind of where we were focused. But enterprise companies may very well prefer MSIX, as it could reduce the amount of work that their IT departments have to do to prep application package for delivery to a large number of end users. So Venkat, I'm going to throw this to you. So let's switch and talk about MSIX adoption as a whole. So what does that look like from the independent software vendors' point of view, from the ISV's point of view?
Sure. So I think when it originally started, right? So I think when Apex came in, Apex was MSIX is just a successor of Apex, right? So when Apex came in, I think the narrative was that hey, move your apps to the store, right? I think that kind of pissed off a lot of people, because I do not want to move to the store, right? So for tons of reasons, I would not have better control over my app. Things have changed. The Microsoft Store, over a period of time, both the public store and store for business. But when it was originally announced that hey, these are apps for the store, people did not like it simply. right? Because I lose flexibility on managing that. I lose flexibility on understanding who my customers are. A typical example is our own PLC, where we have put insights into who is using what, right? Which versions, licensing, and everything. The moment I publish to my store, I lose all of this track, right? So, but what I like about MSIX is that, it was not described as, hey, store first, right? So it is supposed to be a side-loaded application or a side-loaded installation. Yes, you want to publish to the store, go ahead. That's fine. We have capability and support for that, right? So that kind of opened the doors and start making people think that the technology itself is more open rather than just being constrained to an ecosystem of Microsoft, right? And then as far as ISVs are concerned, it's like a chicken and egg scenario. Okay, what is in it for me? Okay, if enterprise are not taking it, right? So why should I go through this pain of converting my scripts? And then they'll spend years and years writing install scripts or other proprietary scripts to make their installers work. Right now, converting that to an MSIX package is no trivial. And installation it's always to be kept in mind that for an ISV is always an afterthought. Right? So we still have customers using older versions of installation just because my installer works fine. So there's no real need for me to just go grab something new. Right? So don't fix it if I ain't broke, right? So that's the mindset we have with most people who try to build software, and their core focus area wants to be on their application from which they make a lot of revenue, but then not focus on a lot on how the deployment and all speed. But there are certain users who want to reduce a lot of support costs because of the advantage that MSIX brings. That's where they start engaging with us to understand. Okay, so what is in it for me? How do I get this started? How do I get started? Right? So as Kiran was mentioning a couple of times a while ago, that what started as curiosity and interest has now gotten into, hey, I want to do this. Okay, how do I do that? Right? Like, for example, I want to add a new extension, new declaration to it. So how do I get to do that? Right? So it's gotten into gotten from a phase where I got some set of files. How do I just get started? To adding, hey, I have a service. How do I get in? How do I install that? Is service really containerized? We say no, it's not really, but it works, right? So from an ISV standpoint, installation is not the core USP of the product. Spending time on overcoming the current limitations of MSIX. Many people might not be interested in, but over a long term, if you see. We recently what we're seeing is there is an MSIX first strategy adopted by people who are just getting started, who do not have a lot of technical debt with respect to, I got tons of scripts already lying around, I've got tons of custom actions lying around, it's not very easy for me to just make sure that these scripts are converted into something else, or the entire app actually works in a container, right? So people who are just getting started, we see a trend of getting MSIX first, or even a single EXE like that. Right, so now we see that there is a healthy transition, I would say, from just being curious to now slowly understanding the pros and cons and getting into the adoption phase.
Yeah, AppX was something that enterprise never bought into because of the store need, and I'm kind of glad they didn't do it, but it feels like a missed opportunity where for Windows logo certification, you had to have an MSI. There's no stick in getting people to adopt MSIX, and the store actually went in the opposite direction. And now you can have any installer in the store so long as it supports a silent installation capability, which is pretty frequently common these days.
Real quick, like I said, we take questions along the way. Is there a paper that can best describe steps to take in converting from using install script exe installer creation to MSIX? Kiran, should we lead Bob to the developer's guide?
Absolutely. If you are using install shield, and if you've got your projects today in install shield, which you use to build your setup files, The book goes into every detail of a project. How do you deal with, for example, file type associations? If it was MSI or EXE, this is how you deal with your file type associations. Now, when you want to move them to MSIX, this is how you do it. That's one example, but the book really gets into the details. It really gets into the wheel, and I would recommend you reading that book, and you definitely have a good start from there.
Okay, so Bob, who asked the question, if you head over to the resources tab on your screen, or handouts, I should say, and if you look for a developer's guide to MSIX, that should have all that you need in there. Okay, right. Very good. So Bob, you've mentioned adoption, right, from an enterprise perspective a few times. Let's maybe expand on that. And unfortunately, perhaps, what are maybe some of those limitations that are keeping enterprises from moving quickly to adoption?
I think it's mostly familiarity, or maybe the impression that it's not going to handle everything. I saw the same thing happen back with MSI. When it was, I really want one format that all packages are in the same format. And so I think there's this all or nothing approach to adopting MSIX, where if I'm going to do it, I want to do it for everything. That could make people hesitant, right? Because they've got familiarity with the way they currently do it. And there's, word of things being complicated or things being, unsupported. So the driver thing comes up a lot. It should be a non-issue. I wish we could erase that as a reason not to move forward with MSIX. But I think probably from an enterprise standpoint, it comes down to repackaging old applications that don't play well running in a virtual state. So it'll try to reference a file in current directory, and that current directory is virtualized, so the file's not really there. And in order to remedy that, as an ISV, you wouldn't have done that. But we're looking at old applications that don't work the way they're expected to. And so we actually have to go in and run a trace, which basically launches the application and lets you execute it and identify these errors. And so if you see it's not finding a file, then you can go into the support framework and add a fix so that the runtime call to reference that file is intercepted. It actually replaces the executable the shortcut's pointing to. It now points to another that has this extra logic built into it. So it knows where that file is supposed to be. And with that fix, it suddenly works. There's been research that shows that that's a very common scenario in terms of trying to get old applications to work in MSIX, that file redirect requirement. And, and tools should make that easier, right? So PSF is not a simple thing and can be a little intimidating. So tools like Admin Studio are working to make that easier and easier. So you've got, simple forms with validation. We'll be introducing, automatic recommendations based on problems detected during tracing and so forth. So the tools will make it easier. But, we are seeing, like I said, more and more adoption every month. It's become not just the topic that people are interested in hearing more about, but the topic that people have real world questions about that are actually getting their hands dirty with it.
Kieran, what about the need? Or so go ahead.
No, I was saying, I think it's also got to do with the expectation. I don't think anytime in the future or ever you'll be able to convert 100% of the applications in your portfolio to MSIX, because the technology is going to be totally different from what your legacy applications were built. This is a container technology, and some of the things that worked in MSI or EXE will never work in the MSIX. So maybe you should have and see what works for you, and have, okay, I'm looking at least 40, 45, 50% of my applications to be converted to MSIX. And if you get that number, I think you should immediately start your journey towards MSIX and take all the advantages that MSIX offers.
And then new applications coming in, right? It doesn't have to be go back and change everything. It can be something that you take on as new applications enter your environment, or you assess them and see it's going to be one that plays well.
That's a question I wanted to take, Kendra. So I think David is asking, is it platform independent, right? Does it work on both Windows and Mac? So quickly, David, I haven't really explored this a lot, but so Microsoft has introduced the MSIX packaging SDK, and they've open sourced it, and it is supposed to be working for all platforms, Linux and Windows, right, or Unix or Windows, right? So I don't think anybody has, as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think anybody has taken the project further because of the current focus is to get more adoption on MSIX and before it actually is validated for other operating systems. But if I can definitely anticipate that MSIX eventually would make its way into other platforms, given that Microsoft is investing a lot in ensuring that .NET Core is platform ready, right? So eventually, yes. And the answer is no. Eventually, will it make it? I would say yes. I'm hoping that it would, and it becomes a universal standard.
Yeah, that directly relates to one of the reasons MSIX took a while to catch on, is you couldn't use MSIX on every version of Windows right away, right? It started coming on new builds of Windows, and then there was MSIX Core for older, and they would handle the setups differently. So it's that MSIX Core approach that Mac and Linux could theoretically adopt, but a prerequisite would be you have to install the MSIX installer capability on the operating system. So maybe that's another thing that Install Shield can bootstrap for people in the future. But yeah, that's something that very well could evolve, and Microsoft set that possibility up. But like you, Venkat, I haven't seen anybody really sink their teeth into that problem yet.
Yeah, we don't do that for Linux particularly, but I think we definitely have a bootstrapper, as you rightly pointed out. We definitely have a bootstrapper that supports the core runtime and MSIX bundled together so that you can easily install on a Windows 7 operating system. Of course, you don't get all the advantages as in Windows 10 in Win 7, but hey, you do not have to build a different app in Win 7. Right?
So real quick, I've seen some comments. If for our attendees, if you are not seeing at the top of your screen the handouts, please go ahead and refresh your browser. I know we've had a couple of folks who weren't seeing them. So just refresh, look for handouts, and you can find the book that Karen and I have mentioned, Developer's Guide to MSIX there. Okay, I'm going to move on. We're coming in close to the end. I want to get this last question in there. So we want to talk about modification packages. MSIX supports the creation of packages intended to modify or extend an existing package, which are referred to as modification packages. So they allow customers to create customized configurations and to enclose plugins to a package, to name just a couple of uses. So Kieran, what's your point of view on transforms versus modification packages?
I see that it's going to benefit our IT pros. It's going to save them a lot of time. The reason is transform or .mst, the extensions. Those are the files that the IT pros use very commonly to customize their set of files. Today, the way transform works is if you have got one MSI, you have to create one transform file. Now, let's say there is a new version of a software available, you will have to create another transform file. So there is one-to-one mapping between MSI and the transform file. Now, that is going to break with modification package. You could create one modification package and it works on all the versions of the MSIX that would be released in the future. So that is going to be a really time saver. And while that is the biggest benefit, but one point that I see could be a little limitation is today, the modification package allows you to make changes only to the files and the registry area. And if there is something beyond that, you may not be able to. So that maybe I'm hoping Microsoft will address someday and it becomes more equivalent to what transforms can do today. Well, there is one more benefit with the modification is it gets installed as an independent entity outside of the main package. So tomorrow, if you want to change your customizations, you could just uninstall the modification package, bring in the new changes, and deploy it back. So that is another big advantage that I see that modification packages would bring in to the IT pro guys.
It's a follow-up question there, Ken. So, what do I do with my existing transforms? So they're all dead.
The existing transforms?
Mm.
Yeah, we are trying to figure out, for example, now you have an MSI, you obviously have to go through the repackaging process, right, to convert to MSIX. Now, if you really want to save some time, you could bring in your transform right in the repackaging process, though, so you get your first customization right away inside the MSIX. So that could be one easy way that I can think of where you could deal with the bunch of transform files that you already have in the past. And for all the future customizations, you might have to start creating a transform file. But if you still want to keep them outside of the main MSIX, which I think is a best practice, that they usually try to keep them outside, don't want to disturb the main installer, then you have to look at what your transform file has got and convert them to modification. Not at this point, but someday in Admin Studio, we are also trying to see how you could take your transform file and convert to a modification package with few click of buttons.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Kiran. So I don't think there's a good use of the repackager to embed the MSI and the MS3 including the repackaging process, so that all the work you've already done is not simply a waste of time, right? So
yeah,
this is not a huge impediment for somebody just wanting to move to MSIX, because their customizations are now embedded right into the MSIX. And of course, you want to keep them separate, but that's a choice, right? So, customers would want to do it, some would want to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for getting light on that.
Sure.
Real quick, Venkat, and we are coming in at the end. I think we've got maybe 3 minutes. Is there something you want to say there regarding, from an ISV perspective? Something maybe short and sweet before we got to close things out. And again, everyone, if you do have another question, please throw that into the Q&A. We'll try to get it answered. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure, Kendra. So, I think there's nothing we haven't covered already, but I think there's a lot of our users who are just beginning to build their small apps in the last 1 or 2 years, adopting an MSIX for a strategy rather than trying to build an MSI and then we'll see how this pans out, right? Because the development technology is also been evolving a lot, reducing the dependency on system files and whatnot, right? And we have been hearing a lot of success stories from for example, Schneider Electric who has built a couple of 2 or 3 applications in MSIX first, right? And Bob shared a good example of how Firefox, such a big browser, can actually be packaged as MSIX, and the entire ecosystem is working on MSIX, right? So these are all positive signs, because there's the installation process is pretty seamless and intuitive, and and most on top of everything, I think there's a good amount of feedback coming from the community, and that the feedback is being received well, and the right steps are being taken to address them. Like a simple example is Microsoft is even allowing some UI customization to the installation experience. It could be very small and minor, but it's it still shows the openness to listening to the feedback and act on them.
Okay, very good. So I'm gonna end it here before we run out of time here. So thank you, gentlemen, Venkat, Bob, and Kiran. Thank you for this important discussion and for joining me today. Until next time, I hope we get to do this again. It was excellent. So thank you. To our audience, just a reminder, please check out the handouts section and download any of the assets that may help you along your MSIX journey. If you have any questions for our panelists, you see their contact information there. I'm sure if you reach out, they'd be glad to get back with you and answer any additional questions or comments. So feel free to do that. And to everyone, thank you for joining us, and have a fantastic day.